is it something that you should consider using in any of your projects if you're a mobile developer or even a developer in general who's looking to build mobile apps? So without further ado, let's just hop right into it. All right, so what is Flutter? Flutter is a cross-platform technology developed by Google and is developed with the Dart programming language with a whole bunch of other stuff that we're not going to get into. This is going to be mainly a 30,000 foot view of it, but just know that you write your application once and then you can compile it down to an iPhone application or an Android application. And these are run natively, so it's not like there's some weird bridge that's going on that's using one language to talk to another language or to talk to another framework. It's actually running natively directly on the device itself. So how does that really work? So you may have heard of other technologies like React Native and perhaps Cordova and multiple other ones out there, but how does Flutter work? And I think the best analogy that's really out there is video games. If you played a video game on iPhone or on Android and it's the same video game, most likely the UI was exactly the same. The buttons were the same color, the same shape, the same theme, they were in the same location. In essence, the game looked exactly the same. So how do game companies do this? Do they develop the application twice for both platforms, or do they develop it once? Well, the answer is pretty simple. They actually just develop it once. Now, there are some edge cases where they kind of will do some things special for Android and special for iOS, but for the most part, they're developing the application once. But how do they do that? So to really understand how Flutter works and using the game kind of concept behind the scenes, what you need to understand is on both iOS and on Android, there's a concept known as basically a canvas. And just like a canvas that you would paint something on, a canvas in both iPhone and Android is basically that. It's a blank canvas. In both platforms, developers have the option to just draw onto a canvas, and they can do whatever they would like to do. They can draw lines, triangles, circles, etc. You get the point. What game companies do is they basically will be given that canvas. They say, hey, we need a way to intercept input events and how to draw on the screen. And then of course they need to know when the application's present and a number of other things, but those are the basic core principles that they need to know. And the game just basically gets drawn onto a canvas in real time when the application's present. And so all the game company needs to know how to do is to draw to an iPhone canvas or draw to an Android canvas. So what they can do is they can create their own custom button themes and everything, which this is why if you've played a video game, the buttons never look like iPhone buttons or they never look like Android buttons when you're playing a video game. The game buttons and input boxes and everything else look the same on both platforms because they've already created a theme for it and they're drawing it directly to the screen. So they can control every aspect about how that input box works. These are not input boxes or buttons that are provided by Apple or Google. It's something the actual game company has done. And this is exactly how Flutter is working behind the scenes, really. Again, this is a higher 30,000 concept view here, but if you're using something like the material design theme inside of Flutter, what's actually happening is it's not actually using any of the Android View widgets to draw that directly to the screen. They have recreated all of the input boxes, all of the buttons, all of the components that you see on the screen to render it directly to the screen. So it looks just like the material design would on Android. They're following the material design spec, so it is correct accordingly, and material design is a cross-platform design language, so it does work on iOS as well. So if you're using the material design widgets, it's just being drawn to a canvas, and that canvas is either going to be on Android or an iPhone. This is why the application can be written once, is because it's just drawing to a canvas, just like a game would be. And then it's being compiled to each individual platform. So they usually just have to write the application once inside of a game. The same thing goes for Flutter. You write the application once, and depending upon the target, iPhone or Android, it will then be rendered accordingly, and you then have your output, which is either app, which is run natively and is running directly on the application. It's not actually calling into lower level UI tab views or UI view controllers inside of iOS, and it's not calling in perhaps into the Android view system, and nothing's being intercepted over there. It's actually just calling the events that are particular just inside of Flutter. And again, that's just happening inside of the Flutter runtime in itself. So one code base compiles to both platforms. That's what Flutter is and how it works. So you're probably wondering, all right, that sounds cool, but has anybody actually built anything with this framework at all so far? In fact, there's a number of companies that have built some impressive applications with it. Companies such as Google, Groupon, eBay, Tencent, Insight Timer. A lot of these applications that are out there, such as eBay Motors and the Insight Timer, have millions of installs available out there. So there's tons of applications that have been written in Flutter. In fact, some of these applications may already be running on your device and you don't even know that it's a Flutter application. If you're interested in seeing what apps have been written in Flutter and what companies are using it, just Google what apps have been written in Flutter and you'll end up on the Flutter showcase page, which is updated quite frequently. And you'll see a number of applications that have been written in Flutter. So you can kind of actually gauge who's out there also using it, so it doesn't seem like a fly-by-night technology. Okay, so let's get to my thoughts on Flutter. Is Flutter something that you should use? Again, this is gonna be some decision that you're gonna have to make on your own, but hopefully at the end of this video, I'll have some additional information to help you make that decision. Now for me, Flutter is something that I definitely do use, and I will continue to use for as long as it's around, unless there's a better alternative that comes around. Now, why is Flutter something that I use or other companies interested in using? Why is there such a big hype about it? The main reason for this is if you're building an application and it has an iOS component and an Android component, meaning there's an iOS app and an Android app, both the applications have to run and basically look the same if you're building the same application. For example, if a user installs Instagram on their iPhone, they expect it to look the same if they have an Android phone as well. And for the most part, it looks almost exactly the same. To the end user, they don't care if you're using Objective-C and Swift on iOS or if you're using Java or Kotlin or Jetpack Compose on Android. They just care that their app works. Now, what this means to a business is they have to build the application twice. Now you may be thinking, well, no, they don't. They're building one application for iPhone users and one application for Android users. Yes, but the application does the exact same thing. It just runs on two different platforms. So essentially, they're building the same application twice. Now, many of you who are software developers who are watching this have worked in different companies where you've probably sat on teams and spoke to the opposing team, which not the opposing, but the alternative framework team. Such as if I'm an Android developer, I might be talking to my iOS counterpart and we'll be having a conversation, and the conversation might go like this. So how are you gonna handle this screen over here and this certain condition, this weird edge case? How are you handling that? And we'll have a conversation back and forth. Well, what we're doing is we're basically implementing the same exact logic on two different platforms. So that means twice the amount of development, twice the amount of support, twice the amount of quality assurance, twice the number of bugs probably, because there's going to be some bugs on one platform and some bugs on a different platform. And again, with different devices, you're going to have different bugs and all kinds of stuff. Overall, you're looking at over twice the cost to develop the same application for two platforms. So from a business perspective, especially from a startup, in fact, even large companies are looking at this. They're wondering, how can we reduce the cost to build that same application, but just do it once, limit the bugs so we only have this bug happen once, and how can we do that effectively? So this has been a question that has come up since the two different platforms have basically emerged as the top two platforms. And of course, this has happened with React Native, this has happened with Cordova, this happened with web apps and progressive web apps, and now it's happening with Flutter as well. How can we use one of these cross-platform technologies to save money and time? And so this is something that businesses really want to look into. So that being said, what are my real thoughts on how and when you should use Flutter? So before I tell you about when you should use it, let's talk about when you should not use it, in my opinion. And these are going to be the use cases when you should not be using it. And number one is going to be if your application needs deep system level integration. That means you need to do something very specific to the iOS application. Perhaps you're integrating something very deeply with the operating system, or you're doing the same thing on Android. You need some deep level system integration on the Android side. Flutter is not really built for that. Yes, caveat aside, you can do that and dive down deep into the system level integrations with kind of a different code path in Flutter. But my recommendation is, if you're just starting out, I would avoid those types of applications, usually because you don't know what you don't know, and you could be opening Pandora's box. Secondly, if perhaps you're on the Android operating system and you're working on a custom fork of Android, it might work a little bit differently and you might not know what you're getting into on that side. So you kind of have to be careful. Anytime there's deep system level integration, I usually kind of step back and will use the default platform for that application. Number two, I don't recommend that you use Flutter for building games. Now, if you're gonna use a text-based game and there's no animation, there's nothing else, you don't need to draw characters and all that normal game engine stuff, then yeah, maybe that's okay if it's just gonna be a text game. But that's literally the only option I would ever say for games. If you're gonna create a game, you need to use a game framework. Do not be using Flutter to create your game. It's not built for that. Number three, media apps. Now, I define media apps as any app that needs to perform playback for video or audio and do it at a high definition and high integration level. So perhaps you need to be tracking playback, you need to be forming like maybe bookmarks on audio or video, and just deep media integration. You also want the system level integration, so it's perhaps on the lock screen and all different types of integrations, and maybe you're interacting with different platform components such as Bluetooth headsets and so forth. All these different types of things, while yes, most likely could be accomplished with Flutter, you're gonna run into a lot of headaches, and then you kind of have to be weighing what's the cost to the benefit versus the risk and associate with that. So to me, I usually stay away from anything that's media related. Okay, so that's when I would not use Flutter for your application development. But when would I use Flutter for application development? Number one, if your application is gonna be forms over data, I would definitely recommend that you use Flutter. Forms over data means there's forms and you need to input data or edit data or read data, and that's all really your application does. It doesn't need to do much else. It communicates with an API, maybe shows some graphs, graphics look kind of cool, a couple animations, that's fine. That's a forms over data application. And in my opinion, 80 to 90% of applications out there probably fall underneath this realm. So most likely you probably don't need that deep system level integration for your forms over data application. Yes, there's caveats to that, but if you're just general forms over data, Flutter's a fantastic opportunity. Number two, if you're a small team, you have a small budget, you have a tight deadline, you're a startup with limited resources, and you need to build an application, you need to validate your market in your brand new company, and you have to have an app that's not a web app. It needs to be installed in the Google Play Store or the App Store for whatever reason. This is a fantastic opportunity for you to use Flutter, mainly because you can do it with limited resources and build one application. Again, as long as you're following number one, which is the application is forms over data. It's gonna allow you to test and validate your market much quicker because you're just gonna be able to iterate much faster on your application and find out where the real value proposition of your app is. And number three is, you just really want a very, very simple UI. Anytime I build a Flutter application, I automatically default to the material design theme. Now you may be wondering, even on iOS? Yes, I have the material design theme even running on iOS. It's a design system that's meant to run cross-platform. It's very simple, it works. The material design theme is easy to customize. What I will do typically is find the customer's icons, perhaps their style guide, and then match the colors of the material design theme to the actual colors of their style guide so the application looks like it belongs to the company. Of course, I'm gonna put the images and logos into the app as well, but this just makes my life a bunch easier because the buttons are already styled, the input boxes are there, I get a bunch of functionality built in right out of the gate, and it makes me way faster in developing the application for the client. And usually this is gonna be for startups or companies that wanna validate a market or even test a product out. Furthermore, this is something that I've actually used to help people test out their sales for a particular product. We've created a MVP for them as a Flutter application so they could go out and sell the application to potential clients to see if there's actually a market for this. They didn't have to invest 6 months of research and development up front. We were able to develop a quick proof of concept in Flutter, get it working with an existing API so it would work, and then their sales team was off to go see if it would provide value to their customers. So again, if you're using a basic theme, it just makes things go a lot faster. You can create your own custom theme, but then again, you're gonna be spending a lot of time building out all those components. So I recommend you start with something that's built in, like the material design theme, or you can use Cupertino, but then Cupertino is just directly targeted towards iOS, and that would look really weird on Android itself, while material design is meant to be cross-platform. Lastly, one of the big things that gets asked a lot anytime we start talking about Flutter is, Why is the Flutter community so active? Why is it so vibrant? Why is everybody so hyped up about Flutter? Well, React Native had that a little bit. Cordova kind of had that a little bit. Xamarin had that from the .NET perspective, and there's been a few other ones that have tried. But why is Flutter seem so different? The main reason is because there's not any pre-existing platform bias that comes with it. Flutter is different. You're writing everything in Dart, and it's rendering to a canvas. So if you come from an Android background, where you're doing Java or Kotlin and you're working with the Android view system, the Android framework, everything's brand new to you. If you come from the iOS world, Swift, Objective-C, all those kind of things, and you come over to Flutter, it's brand new to you. There's no existing platform bias. If you've worked with React, you'll find some familiarity in how the view system is created inside of the actual Flutter application itself. You're going to provide the buttons and the clicks all inside of the code, just like you would inside of a React application. So some of those same concepts were taken from React, and it's a unidirectional data flow type of system. And it makes it very easy and actually quite fun to build the application. But this is why this community is so vibrant. There's not one particular group trying to convince the other group. If you have a bunch of Kotlin and Java developers trying to convince iOS developers that they need to write their app in Kotlin, the iOS folks are going to fight back every single time. I've seen it happen at numerous companies who try to do something, Kotlin multi-platform. iOS team does not want to have anything to do with it. They want to do everything in Swift. Now, Swift folks have an idea or can do something in Swift. They will try to convince the Android team to do it in Swift or Objective-C or whatever. Most likely, they're going to fight back against that because they have their own platform bias. Both teams are biased to their own platform, but Flutter isn't. Flutter is just this new kid on the block that says, hey, here's a completely different way of doing something. We're not going to do it like everybody else did it before. Android, you did your thing one way. iOS, you did your thing another way. And then here comes Flutter says, we're going to do it a completely different way, and it's going to work on both platforms. So what you have is basically a brand new community with some folks who came from iOS and some who came from Android to join that community. But basically a brand new community was created from the ground up that are very passionate about building applications this way. And once you build a couple of Flutter applications, you'll find it's actually quite enjoyable. The testing framework's built right in. It was built for mobile applications, and you can tell the development experience is way better than most other development experiences out there. You just need a couple of tools and you're off and running. This is why it's such a vibrant community, because it's so new. There is no bias of convincing one or convincing other. It's just a brand new community, and they're thriving in their own ecosystem together, and the ecosystem is just growing and growing and growing. Okay, so that kind of wraps it up really, but I have one last thing to talk about that, and that is, where does Flutter go from here? There's been talks of compiling to the web and compiling to desktop and compiling all different types of places. What are my thoughts on that? I'm more bullish on Flutter being a cross-platform mobile technology. That means iOS and Android. I feel that you can write the application once and it will come out great, given the proper scenarios that I've explained previously. However, compiling to the web and compiling to desktop, while it might work, we have tried these solutions many times. We've tried it with Flash, we've tried it with Java, we've tried it with ActiveX, we've tried it with Silverlight. All of these things have been attempted before. Now, I'm not saying that Flutter is going to fail in any of these regards. However, we've been down this road before, and every time it seems that we always end up back on the particular platform that we're developing on. If we're developing Windows applications, it might be C#. If we're developing Mac applications, it might be an Objective-C or whatever we're going to write in over there. And lately, a lot of these applications have actually been trending back towards the web with Electron, which is HTML and JavaScript. Now, HTML and JavaScript haven't really made the full circle way of making native applications. Now, you may have heard of React Native, yes, but there's still a shim between the React Native runtime and the actual runtime that runs on each platform. So there is a little bit of a delay there, and it is noticeable. Some people say it's not noticeable. It is noticeable if you know what you're looking for. And I've worked with many React Native applications that have been very painful, unfortunately. With Flutter, there is none of that shim that's inside of there for the mobile applications. But we haven't got there with JavaScript and HTML to run on mobile where there's no kind of like this little shim thing in the middle. So my opinion is Flutter's great for mobile. I don't know if I'll ever use it for desktop or web or anything of that nature, simply because I really feel that the web technology out there is going to get better and better and better. We're going to see faster and faster speeds. And eventually, if we have to compile down to web, what are we going to compile to anyway? We're going to compile to HTML and JavaScript. And when something breaks, what are we going to be debugging? HTML and JavaScript. So a lot of times you can just find it better off to just write your application in HTML and JavaScript if you need a web app. But if you need an actual native application that runs on both platforms, then I think Flutter is a good option. Again, taking into consideration when you should not use it, which then again I mentioned before, and when you should use it. So will I use it going forward? Definitely. I will always reach for Flutter most likely going forward, just because it allows me to develop 80 to 90% of the applications that I encounter as a freelancer and as a consultant and as someone who's maybe working with startups. Now again, there's caveats to that. If a client already has an existing application or they only want an Android or an iOS application, then it will be developed in Kotlin or Java or Objective-C and Swift. That's okay. But if a company is brand new and they're yet to test something out, it might be worth looking into something in regards to Flutter. If I'm developing my own applications for my own businesses, most likely I'm going to start off with Flutter simply because it allows me to get to market faster. These are all things you have to weigh for yourself and for your clients to see what's going to work and what's not going to work. Now that's not to say that Flutter doesn't have problems. Flutter does have problems. In fact, numerous jank and lag problems were introduced within the last year or two that have been worked on, and not sure if they've been resolved at the time of this recording, meaning that on iOS, scrolling large lists would provide some jank inside of the screen. And that gets very frustrating and provides a very poor user experience. And this wasn't there until certain technology changes were made. So, does that mean you should avoid it? No, but there's things you should be aware of that it's not the perfect solution. So if you're looking for something that's very ironclad and is going to be perfect with no issues whatsoever, then you might want to look directly to your native platform, which is going to be iOS or Android. But if you're looking to get to market faster, ship code, validate things, test something out, or just kind of get your basic forms over data application out there, and you can live with maybe a little bit of jank until that problem is resolved, which they are working on, then Flutter might be something worth looking into. Now again, everybody's going to have a wide array of opinions on this, so that's my take on Flutter. If you want to use it, it's up to you. I hope that helps, and I'll catch you in the next video.